Hey kids, what's going on? I'm just out here walking around my freaking yard, uh, kind of doing this guerrilla style video. This is kind of a reply to Rikk R Treat's new video, like his journey into horror punk, which, granted, you get that with my normal videos, and God forbid I get one up anytime soon. But to be fair, I have been recording for multiple videos all freaking day. Um, but uh, I kind of gave myself a boot in the ass to get shit done. And in this case, this is a quick and dirty, so I can get this done pretty fast. And it's kind of interesting because you get little tidbits of, me doing, my journey through my little anecdotes in the history videos, but doing some kind of weird comprehensive video like this will be kind of fun. So, my journey into horror punk. Let's see, where to start? Well, I guess we start back at the beginning, when I was little. I listened to a shitload, like, my musical journey really started with the Beach Boys, and, like, 60s surf, 60s pop. My mom had this box of 45s, which I still have. But, I mean, there was like Jan and Dean and Elvis, Beach Boys, Ventures, Beatles, that kind of stuff. She had a box of that, and I would listen to that stuff. And then, of course, the mandatory Disney records and shit like that. That's the kind of stuff I would listen to. I listened to that pretty steadily until, oh man, I don't know, I was maybe 8 or 9. And then she gave me the Doors' first album, which I've kind of talked about that before in like the albums that really transformed me, the ones that stuck with me the longest. And that Doors' first record was just goddamn amazing. And it has nothing to do with horror punk, but it opened me up to a whole new world of music. And that kind of ushers me into junior high, because I did get into some of the weird stereotypical crap late 80s and early 90s kids got into. I listened to Vanilla Ice, I listened to MC Hammer. I was like 9 or 10, whatever. From the get-go, I fucking hated, and still to this day can't stand hair metal. Like that 80s fucking Slaughter and Motley Crue and crap like that. It was never my cup of tea. So, I listened to that I listened to the Doors quite a bit. And then I kind of discovered AC/DC, which coalesced in my very first concert, which was AC/DC on the Ballbreaker tour. So that was pretty cool. That was in '95, I think. I think that's when Ballbreaker came out. But before, like, even going up into junior high, I listened to shitloads of AC/DC, and then I started getting into the '70s classic stuff. Your Zeppelins, Pink Floyd, Jethro Tull. Steve Miller Band, stuff like that. I had no rhyme or reason. I just listened to whatever caught my ear. And then the end of 7th grade hit, and going into 8th grade, I transferred schools and got bombarded by what would be like contemporary 1993, 1994 music. Nine Inch Nails' Downward Spiral came out. Like all that grunge shit that was being just thrown at us. A lot of that stuff just takes me back to special times in my life. Came FDM. I really took to industrial pretty heavy. I remember the first 2 punk records that I got that, like, even before I really started listening to the Ramones, I got into It was Green Day's Dookie came out, and Offspring Smash. Like, but I had both of those on cassette tape. I think I still have them on cassette tape somewhere. That was kind of my intro to punk, which, like back in the day, it was definitely like your tried and true hardcore punkers were just like, it's pop punk, it's not real punk. Whatever, you know, there are gateways into everything. I mean, there are like when I was in high school, we made fun of Blink 182, and then there are tons of kids nowadays who are in their late 20s that are like, Blink 182 is the most amazing punk band ever. And some of us still kind of roll our eyes at that. So it is what it is. So I kind of listened to that, and then there was also Rancid. That was like Out Come the Wolves was out like my 8th or 9th grade year, and that was kind of a biggie. I'm still not a huge Rancid fan, but I love that record. And this is going to sound kind of weird, but like a lot of the stuff that I was in a cocoon. I was in a shell in high school. I listened to a lot of stuff. Like I got really heavy into electronic music, which I still absolutely love electronic music. But the stuff that I hold dear to my heart, I didn't really, like, I heard the names of them, but I didn't get into them until my first year in college. Like Sisters of Mercy, and like the Misfits, and you know, Switchblade Symphony. I can go down the list of just, you know, goth bands. Like I had both Joy Division records in high school, but I didn't really listen to them until my first year in college. I don't know what the hell it was, but I didn't really, like, that stuff didn't coalesce in my being until then. It also kind of coincides with, like, I would hear all these names in high school, and I bought tons of CDs in high school, but I was just buying random shit. Because back then, you would either hear what your friends had, and you would blind buy like albums from those artists, or you would just go into the record store and see what looked cool. And I mean, like, I knew I wasn't really a big metal guy. I did like Fear Factory, but they had more that industrial edge, and I knew Reese Fulber from Frontline Assembly was in that, or attached to it, which he was. He was the electronics guy behind a couple of their bigger records back then. And the electronic stuff came, it seems like I had a pretty good eye for that, so I mean, I got into Chemical Brothers, Crystal Method, Atomic Babies, and Joey Jupiter, The Orb, Orbital, like a lot of that big beat shit. And I had a lot of friends who went to raves, so like a lot of that Detroit tech came down to me, and like I wanted more aggression, but that stuff was really good to mellow to. And so I'm extending the fact that I would pick up all kinds of random stuff. I was all across the map genre wise, but I would hear names. I remember the first time I heard the Misfits. I was 16, had just gotten my license. My friend Brandon, rest his soul, he stuck a Misfits tape in my car because he's like, you got to hear this, and he put in Walk Among Us, and that was kind of the end of that. Like, we listened to that, and it was fucking amazing. But it did, like, I didn't get obsessed with that until my first year in college, which also coincides with my buying my first computer. And also Napster. Not just Napster, but like all the search engines. I would pick a band name that popped out of my head. And I was already starting to go down the darker leaning goth path. Because believe me, as soon as I figured out what the flying fuck goth was, like, I was living in Columbus, Ohio. We had a decent goth scene up there in the late 90s, and I fell down that rabbit hole so fucking fast. There was this really neat comic shop called British Paper Mill, right off of Bryce Road up in Columbus. And I would go there, and the girl who worked the counter, named Anastasia, was just full-blown 90s goth. I mean, she would come in to the, you know, to the T dressed up, and I would go in there and I'm just this, like, I had no fashion sense back then. Some would argue I still have no fashion sense, but I would go in there and it was a comic shop, and I'm been reading comics since the 80s. So I would go in there and start looking through all the indie comics. That's where I found Voltaire, because he put out Oh My Goth, and that's where I got those comics. And then Afterlife and Gothland, and just she had independent goth zines and punk zines in there. Columbus back in the day even had a full-time goth club, not a club with a goth night, a full-on goth club. And I would go to that occasionally. Of course, when I was 18, my self-esteem was very, very low. I was also a lot heavier, and I was pretty miserable, but I was a reader, so I would read. And no, I did not latch on to Anne Rice novels, but there were a lot of other things I did latch on to, because I was also a role player. So the Vampire the Masquerade books, I would just flip through. But then I got my first computer, and a lot of those late 90s PC games like Vampire the Masquerade Redemption, Gothic, etc., etc., those games really helped bring my personality out. And then eventually I got interested in actually looking how I wanted to look, but it was kind of hard. Like, those things helped crack the shell that I was in. The comics, the games, and then Napster happened, and search engines, and I would just think of a band name. I remember sitting in an apartment I was living in, and I just had this moment of clarity where I thought, Sisters of Mercy, and I started searching songs on Napster. And I remember downloading Lucretia My Reflection and Dominion. I mean, those are some of the more popular songs, but they were some of the more popular downloads, especially back then. I downloaded those, and then the Misfits. I think Ghouls Night Out was the first song I ever heard. I ever remember, like, thinking, oh my God. And then that obsession happened, and there was a record store. And keep in mind, this was 99, 2000. This was my first year in college. There was a record store a mile or so from my apartment called Record Connection, which is sadly no longer there, on Hamilton Road. And I went in there, and they were a metal, punk, and goth record store. I mean, they had a few other things, but that was what they specialized in. Mostly metal. I met Cradle of Filth. I had my roommates would drag me in there to signings. I met Sebastian Bach in there. I met Cradle of Filth in there, and I had absolutely no fucking idea who those people were. Cradle of Filth, and this is gonna sound hilarious coming from me, they scared the living shit out of me when I was 18, because I had no idea what the hell those guys were taking me to. And then I walk in, and Danny Filth sitting behind the counter with his blackout contacts and, you know, all of his spooky rings and looking like a crazy vampire, and it was exhilarating and frightening at the same time. And I still flirt with Cradle of Filth, but I'm not a big metal guy. I'm really picky about the metal I listen to. So I know we're like 14 minutes into this, and I still haven't gotten to how I got into horror punk. Well, let's start with that now. I got obsessed with the fucking Misfits. I'm still obsessed with the Misfits to this day. I would go into Record Connection, and I just started spending all of my extra money on Misfits CDs. I bought them all really fast. And then I got the Jerry and Doyle dolls. I got t-shirts. I got anything and everything I could get my hands on. Then once I got all that, I started just branching off. I got Sisters of Mercy CDs. I got Switchblade Symphony CDs. I got Bauhaus. I got, let me think here. I was literally just anything that I thought was like dark and ominous, I picked up. Typo Negative. I had a friend in high school had listened to them, so that name popped out in my head, and I'm like, well, I should check this out. This looks like what I want to listen to. And so that was my musical journey had begun. Like I say, it took a while. Then, once all that happened, I moved back to my mom's house. Life events happened, but I had my computer. I had my brand new. I had a Gateway 2000. If that wants to make, like, if that dates me any. So I got this brand new Gateway 2000, and I would sit in my room at my mom's house, and I would play video games, and then I would surf the internet all night long. At the time, I was really, really sick. So I was just, focusing on getting better, and then I eventually, I think I did that for about a year, and then went back to college. But I started getting really involved with the online Misfits message board community and meeting people. And through that, all these bands that were maybe between 3 years and 1 year old started popping up. And they were like, if you like the Misfits, you might like us. Gee, that's where I found Blitzkid, the Vladimirs, Green Goblin Project. Let me think here. Well, Cancer Slug, Mr. Monster, Shadow Reichenstein, Nuke and the Living Dead. And then eventually because of Blitzkid's website, because Blitzkid, they had a GeoCities website way back when. And their links page, they had links to every band they ever played with. And man, I would go through that and just see who I liked. And I found the Groovy Ghoulies. And then there was this guy named Drew Blood who had a college radio show. And it was just all horror punk. And this is before, I don't ever remember hearing the term horror punk until 04 or 05. We had about 50 different fucking names for it back then. And I started meeting people that I'm still friends with to this day, like some of my best friends. And we would just pass bands, like, you should check this band out, you should check that band out. And I would, if I wanted an album, I would email the person from, one of the people from the band, and I would send them a fucking money order to get that record. I did that with Shadow Reichenstein. I did that with Erie Lane. I think I did that with the Rosedales. Thankfully Blitzkid was within driving distance, so I started going to see them in 02, and yeah, so I would see them, and I just bought all their stuff, and that was how I got Mr. Monster stuff. And then the Jackalopes were from Dayton, so I would go see them, and so on and so forth. I mean, that was kind of how it was. Once I got into the Misfits, all the early second wave horror punk bands, like the Mr. Monster Blitzkid, and everyone associated, and everyone who was in that early 2000s scene, they would hit the Misfits message boards. And then mp3.com was a big player in that, because we would, one would lead to another. And there are some bands that were amazing that just never took off, Alex Can't Sleep. Fucking who remembers that band? But they were amazing. And that's kind of my journey to horror punk. I mean, once I got into goth, I kind of got into the Misfits at the same time, and I was deep in the goth scene. And then Outland and Columbus closed, and I was just I just went for it with horror punk, and that was kind of what I was into. And since that kind of died off, and here we are. And the Ohio horror punk scene's a little smaller now, and then the goth scene's about non-existent. So now I gotta travel to everything. But I absolutely, I am into what I'm into, and I love every second of it. So that's kind of my journey into horror punk, and really goth too, because that's kind of where I hang my hat. I plant a foot in both areas. So yeah, anyway, I'll catch you kids sooner than later. I've got videos in the work on the Midnight Chamber, so I guess I will be talking to you guys soon.